Hi, Andrew from Sachs. Welcome to video number 4 in our 6-video sequence on the psychology of power. So far we've talked in this sequence about where power comes from, what power actually is, and we've also given examples of people who rose to very prominent positions of power from very humble beginnings, and we've looked at some of the research evidence as to why that happens. So in this video we're going to be talking about how personality can affect the degree to which somebody seeks power, but also the degree to which they achieve power. Firstly, some interesting findings. Individuals differ on the extent to which they seek to dominate others. If you look at the characteristics of people who seek to dominate others, there are some really interesting characteristics that the typical power seeker often exhibits. Less able to handle stress and conflict in their group. They prefer people who are ingratiators but don't respect them. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? I'll include you if you ingratiate yourself to me, but I may not respect you and I may not take into account what you have to say or treat you particularly with respect. And finally, when people who are power cravers, they tend to produce more negative self-views amongst subordinates. There are a couple of orientations, and the way I like to think of it is that leaders can have a power orientation, which is where they seek to increase their own authority, or they can have what we might call an outcomes orientation. Outcomes orientation is where we're trying to create a better outcome in terms of our customers or our recipients of services, or maybe make the world a better place. And the better place could be through profit or whatever. But the point is that there are leaders who are outcome focused and there are leaders who are power focused. It turns out that where leaders are power focused, they tend to have lower levels of well-being amongst their subordinates. So personality certainly affects how an individual will choose to use their power. If you've got a high achievement orientation, high achievement often results in tighter control strategies. And you may have noticed this, if you work with somebody who is really determined to achieve a certain goal, they may be a little more controlling of people around them in order to try to achieve that goal. In addition, high authoritarianism can result in more coercive tactics, which may reflect more punishment strategies or more authoritarian type strategies amongst the people who report to this person who has power. And in interview situation, dominant people prefer socially capable candidates, whereas non-dominant people prefer capable candidates. You can imagine you're interviewing candidates for a job, and if I'm a kind of a power-orientated person, it means that I might focus more on people's interpersonal capabilities, whereas if I'm a less power-orientated individual, really what I'm trying to do is to find out the skills of the person and make the right appointment. I want to talk briefly about a thing called likelihood to sexually harass. Likelihood to sexually harass is one of the things that has been indicated and related to hexaco personality. Hexaco personality is a 6-factor view of personality. When we undertake primary research in the world of personality, this is the model that we use, and I believe, and many researchers believe, that it's the most accurate model of personality to predict what happens in the real world. Now, one of the things that we know is that there's a characteristic of hexaco personality which is called honesty-humility, and honesty-humility is a predictor of likelihood to sexually harass. What we find is that people who are lower in honesty-humility, which means that they're kind of less honest and more arrogant, they are more likely to be power seekers and seek to dominate other people, including dominate them sexually. So that's a risk factor. It's a good idea to recruit people who are low in this characteristic, and that means if you can recruit people who are high in honesty, humility, it means that they're more likely to behave honestly and less likely to be power orientated and manipulative. So this is the hexaco model of personality, and you'll find that people who are low in honesty, humility, and let's say extremely focused on diligence, which means that they really want to achieve goals, and in particularly if they're low in agreeableness, which means that they might be more angry people, then that kind of a combination can be an indicator of the likelihood of being a power seeker. And in fact, what this slide shows you is some research that Sachs undertook using thousands of people to see the type of personality characteristics that predicted the tendency to want to have power. So you have the hexaco personality factors, all 6 with 25 facets. Altruism, by the way, is not one of the key 6. It's an additional facet. But what we did is we measured in the thousands of people the degree to which they seek power, and we measured that through the Schwartz portrait values profile, and we were able to measure the power-seeking characteristics through this validated instruments. But then we also had measures of personality based on thousands of people who've been psych tested by Sachs in the past. And the first finding is really that this adjusted R square here, that's like a percentage shared variance figure or a percentage accuracy figure. And what that means is that on average, you can predict the degree to which somebody is likely to power seek with about 54% accuracy if you happen to know their personality. Now, 54% in the social sciences is extremely high. I mean, that's a lot of variance. I mean, you're talking about the majority of variance in power seeking being accounted for by a person's personality. So, for instance, if you think of comparable things, the absolute best interviews ever constructed come out at around about 25% accuracy for predicting job performance, and reference checks about 7% accuracy. So 54% odd is an extremely high figure. But I think what's really interesting is the personality characteristics that cause people to seek power. And you'll notice that you have these best predictors of power here, and we've just picked out the top 5. We've shown you their beta weights. Now, what these beta weights mean, the bigger they are, the stronger the relationship. Negative beta weights means that when greed avoidance is high, then power seeking is low. So just to translate that into simple English, greedy people seek power more often than people who are not greedy. Secondly, altruistic people, when people are low in altruism, what that means is that they're likely to seek power. Now, altruism is the characteristic of wanting to help people, wanting to give people a hand if they're down on their luck or something like that. So generous people are much less likely to be power seekers than people who are the opposite of that. So that's a relationship. Modesty. When modesty is low, then power seeking is high. And what that means is that arrogant people tend much more to seek power. And then there's flexibility. Flexibility is an agreeableness characteristic, and it's kind of anger orientated. In other words, people who are highly flexible tend not to be angry if they're asked to try things someone else's way. I'm sure you've worked with people in the past where if they're asked to do something differently from how they like to do it, then they might get angry, and other people might be quite welcoming of that, or at least comfortable with it. So what this is saying is that when people are low in flexibility, they are much more likely to be power seekers. And then finally, sincerity. When people are high in sincerity, what that means is that they are likely to be honest and truthful and use words just to communicate information rather than to manipulate. And in effect, what you're seeing here is that when people are low in that tendency, they tend to be power seekers. So insincere people may tend to be power seekers. So that paints a picture of power seekers as being greedy, not particularly altruistic, arrogant, inflexible, and insincere, which really is not a very pleasant cocktail from a personality point of view. And the other thing to understand is that a number of those things actually correlate with job performance as well. So if you recruit somebody who is intrinsically a power seeker, then what that means is that they may bring these other negative characteristics, but also they may not do the job so well. Now, later on in this video sequence, we talk about how to avoid this risk. If you're promoting people, some people will be promoted and their behaviors won't change. But other people, when you promote them, you are in fact priming them for power. So you just got to be a little careful about how they might respond to that. So that's a relationship between personality and power. And in the next video, we'll be talking about the relationship between values and power. Click on the link near this video to join us for that video.